it is time for some other high stakes. The David Griscom Economic Minute. The GEM system, if you will.
Yeah, well, taking this one a little international as well. Hello. But, not so much as you would think. It's really important to recognize how connected we are in this country to Mexico. And so often we pay attention to, especially what's going on in Europe, that we forget how crucial Mexico is, not just rhetorically, but also, economically fundamental to the United States economy. And we're so connected to Mexico, not just on the terms of immigration, but because of all of our supply chains really are passing through Mexico. And specifically because of NAFTA and because of all these trade agreements that we've developed over the years, it's been Mexican cheap labor that has been very influential in supply chains. So you hear people talk about all these factories leaving the United States, and they forget to talk about what's happening on the other side, wherein people in Mexico are actually worse off, most workers are, than they were before, for example, NAFTA went into effect. So talking about the maquiladora system, which allows for companies to bring in materials into Mexico to produce and then export with very low tariffs into the United States. This system really allows, a major corporations to exploit Mexican labor, and it's really cheap. We're talking wages are typically on average less than $15 a day. But recently, there's been a very significant strike wave in the city of Matamoros, which is across the Rio Grande from Brownsville, Texas. Mm-hmm. So since January, so this is very recent, around 50,000 workers have gone on strike on companies that either are directly affiliated with or supply Walmart, Coca-Cola, GM, Ford, Tesla, and AutoZone, along with many other organizations. Now, talking today, 90 out of 95 factories in Matamoros that have conceded to these workers' demands. So this has been significant, not only in mobilization, but also in victory. And the Maquiladora Association has estimated that they lost over they had $100 million in losses over the course of these strikes. And not only were these strikes led by unions, we also had 45 wildcat strikes. So those are, technically illegal strikes, but any good strike action is going to tend to be illegal. So it means that, there's mobilization that's going on across the board. And, we're talking about, and also let's not forget that concessions were won at the super anti-union Walmart. So, it's very significant to also recognize that the political context has changed. And a lot of people have argued that this has been spurred by wage increases put in place by AMLO. That went up from 88 pesos to 176 pesos around the border regions. So what the workers there have been demanding is what they call the 2032 movement. So when they had the minimum wage increase, they wanted wage increases for workers across the board, not just people who were making the least amount of money. So they want a 20% raise and a 32,000 peso bonus, one-time payment, which is around $1,600. And many of these workers have been able to get this. The question is with AMLO. So AMLO, what he has done so far has been very significant in that he hasn't broken the strikes. You have to understand how right-wing a lot of these Mexican governments have been.
That is fucking huge.
Absolutely.
That he hasn't broken the strikes.
People are frustrated that he hasn't come out in support, but we will recognize the fact that there's been such a significant political change there that it is allowing for more.
Not breaking is the most significant.
Absolutely,
thing
because
right now.
These people have ordered in, have demanded basically that the federal government come in and break these strikes violently. One of the Coca-Cola had one of their HR people tell people who weren't affiliated with the union to beat up their fellow workers. It's quite violent.
And
the kind of arguments that are going.
Coca-Cola's record at Colombia.
Oh no,
they're
disgusting.
They're disgusting.
And just real quick, I just want to hit these just so we can recognize how important this movement is that's going on in Mexico right now. Out of all the OECD countries, Mexico has the lowest average earnings for workers. So when we're talking about these trade agreements, when we're talking about immigration, when we're talking about what's happened with moving labor outside of the United States into other countries, we also have to recognize that the effects have been devastating. Before NAFTA, workers in these towns were making the equivalent of $1950 a day. Which is still not a lot, but significantly more than the average $9 a day that workers in these factories are making. So NAFTA has been a really bad deal for Mexicans especially. So the direct challenge to these exploitive systems that have been put in place by the United States and by previous Mexican governments are, what's going on right now is very exciting. But this is going to have a significant effect, not just in Mexico, but in the United States. Because if we can start to break these supply chains that use this really cheap, exploited labor, we can start to see some really significant movement. You know, we definitely are seeing a radical labor movement that's brewing in Mexico. It could shake up labor relations in North America, and the powerful are already mobilizing against to stop it.
Absolutely. So, you know, this is something that we're going to cover more. We're also going to do AMLO first 100 days in the post game. But I do think, like, this is exactly the argument, though. And I think AMLO is genuine. Like, he is on the left. He is somewhere on the left. So it is different than simply voting to avert catastrophe, right? Like, maybe you vote for Macron to make sure a fascist like Le Pen isn't there, but Macron is pure enemy, and yellow vests need to go in the streets, and he's an enemy, and that's it. In AMLO's case, it's more complex, but you do see the space that is opened by having the levers of the left in power for the greater demand that also has this spillover effect, as you're saying, on our own supply chains. It's
absolutely, and it's absolutely significant. I will just say, you know, I agree completely. I think the reason people are pushing is because actually it's so exciting that they have the opportunity where potentially you could even have the president supporting strikers.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's something that we definitely should be pushing for, and you know, it's a possibility, which is why people are doing it.
100%. You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.